Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep, really deep, into how the Supreme Court's shift towards conservatism shaped or reshaped civil rights.
Yeah, it's a fascinating journey, starting in the late 20th century and moving into the 21st.
We've got some incredible sources lined up that covered not only the major events, but also the big players.
Oh, definitely. Think Ronald Reagan, Clarence Thomas, the whole affirmative action debate. It's all in there.
And honestly, this story is full of twists and turns, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I mean, did the court's changing approach help or hinder civil rights progress? That's a question we're going to try and unpack.
I think what's so interesting is how different perspectives, different lenses really color our understanding of this period.
It's not just about listing dates and names, right?
Exactly.
We need to understand the legal, the
Yeah.
social, the political currents that influenced, well, everything. Judicial appointments, landmark rulings.
Speaking of appointments, let's start with Ronald Reagan, shall we? The man appointed a whopping 368 judges during his presidency.
That's a legacy that's still felt today.
Hugely impactful. But here's where it gets interesting. Only a tiny fraction of those judges came from diverse backgrounds.
Yeah, that lack of diversity in Reagan's judicial picks, it really reflects, a broader trend within conservative circles at the time.
What was that?
Skepticism, I would say, towards those federal diversity initiatives, especially affirmative action.
Interesting. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, some conservative legal scholars, they argued that putting so much emphasis on race in things like hiring or university admissions, it actually, well, it worked against creating a truly colorblind society.
Sort of a step backward rather than forward in their view.
Exactly. And that tension, that push and pull between those seeking to correct past injustices and those advocating for a purely merit-based system, it really comes to a head, I think, with the appointment of Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court.
Talk about a pivotal moment. You have Thomas, a black man who benefited from affirmative action himself at Yale Law School, replacing Thurgood Marshall.
The first African-American on the court, a champion of civil rights. And then you have Thomas becoming one of affirmative action's most vocal critics.
It's like a complete reversal.
It is symbolic, wouldn't you say, of the shift happening on the court.
Absolutely. And Thomas argued, he really believed that affirmative action created this kind of stigma.
Like, it implied that minority professionals, they weren't hired or admitted based on merit.
Right. And that by emphasizing racial differences, affirmative action could actually hold back progress towards a more unified society.
His perspective definitely added fuel to that ongoing debate over affirmative action.
It's such a complex issue.
Yep.
Was he saying the benefits of affirmative action were outweighed by the potential downsides, at least from his perspective?
Well, it's tough to say for certain. But what is clear is that his appointment fueled this growing conversation, particularly within the Black community. Some folks, they echoed Thomas's concerns.
Others passionately defended affirmative action, right, as essential to combating centuries of systemic discrimination.
Right. And what Thomas's appointment signaled, at least in part, was the solidifying of a more, let's say, conservative legal philosophy on the court. One that questioned the government's role in directly addressing those historical wrongs.
This shift in the court's makeup,
Yeah.
it really becomes clear when you look at its decisions on affirmative action.
Almost like a pendulum swinging back and forth.
Yeah, and it's kind of ironic, isn't it?
Yeah.
The court that gave us those landmark civil rights victories, Brown v. Board of Education, desegregating schools,
Loving v. Virginia.
striking down laws against interracial marriage.
Huge wins.
And then, by the late 1970s, it starts taking, a more cautious approach, to say the least, when it comes to race-conscious policies.
A definite shift in thinking.
So what happened?
Well, it started issuing these rulings that, while not overturning affirmative action completely, they definitely chipped away at it.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. Think about the 1978 Regents of the University of California v. Bake case.
Bake?
The court basically said no to using racial quotas in university admissions.
So, pretty big deal.
It signaled a move away from strong federal support for those race-based policies.
And that case? Did it set a precedent? Did other rulings build on it?
Oh, yeah, it did. It set the stage for, let's say, more restrictive interpretations of affirmative action down the line.
Okay, so affirmative action is still in place, But the legal ground underneath it is, well, it's shifting.
Exactly. And this is happening under different presidents, too. Republicans, Democrats, even Bill Clinton with his whole mend it, don't end it approach.
He recognized there were problems with the system.
He did.
It's like the conversation itself is becoming more nuanced, maybe reflecting, what, a shift in public opinion, too.
I think so. I mean, affirmative action really became this focal point for a much broader conversation about meritocracy, equality, the role of government.
Like, what should the government's role be in addressing those societal inequalities?
Yeah. Exactly. On one hand, you had folks arguing that, look, historical injustices require proactive measures to level the playing field.
You can't just ignore race and expect everything to be magically fixed.
Right. But then on the other hand, critics were saying, hey, wait a minute. Affirmative action, this is reverse discrimination.
Unfairly disadvantaging those who, didn't qualify for those programs?
That was their argument.
Man, it's a tough one. It seems like any time we talk about trying to achieve social justice, you run into these roadblocks.
Competing values, deeply held beliefs on all sides.
And one thing that really stuck with me from the sources is even with affirmative action, a lot of minority communities were still struggling.
Still facing serious challenges in the early 21st century.
High poverty rates, unemployment. You have to wonder, can affirmative action on its own ever truly bridge that gap?
It's a good question. And that's where all these different historical interpretations, of affirmative action and judicial conservatism, they come into play.
Lay it on me.
The sources basically outline 4 main schools of thought.
Okay, 4.
You've got the legal progressive perspective.
Legal progressive.
They argue that affirmative action is crucial, absolutely essential for addressing those systemic inequalities.
Creating a fair society.
Right. They believe that the government has a duty, a responsibility to step in and try to correct those historical wrongs.
So for them, it's not enough to simply be colorblind. You have to acknowledge that legacy of discrimination.
Exactly. Then you have the conservative legal perspective.
Conservative legal. Okay.
Which, aligns pretty closely with the views of justices like Clarence Thomas. They say that affirmative action violates that principle of equal treatment under the law.
And undermines meritocracy.
Their focus is on individual rights, minimizing government intervention.
Keeping the government out of things like hiring, education.
Right. And it's interesting, isn't it, how this echoes that whole idea of a colorblind society, where race shouldn't be a factor.
But then the sources bring up a third perspective.
The revisionist viewpoint.
Revision.
And this one really adds another layer of complexity to the whole debate.
Okay. How so?
Revisionists, folks like Shelby Steele, they don't necessarily oppose the goals of affirmative action, but they question its methods.
And the unintended consequences.
They argue that affirmative action might actually reinforce negative stereotypes, create resentment among those who feel excluded.
So potentially even hurting the very people it's trying to help.
That's their argument. They say it can create this sense of dependence on these programs.
So it's not just about being for or against affirmative action. It's about how these policies are actually put into practice.
And whether they're actually achieving what they set out to do.
Got it. And then there's the fourth one, the socioeconomic perspective. This one seems to take a much wider view.
It does. The socioeconomic perspective basically says, hey, focusing just on affirmative action, this is too narrow.
We're missing the bigger picture.
Yeah. They believe the real issue is those underlying causes of inequality.
Poverty, lack of access to good education, limited economic opportunities.
All of that. They advocate for tackling these issues head on.
So a much more holistic approach.
Right. Because they argue, and I think this is key, that without addressing those fundamental problems, affirmative action is just a Band-Aid.
Not a cure.
Exactly.
Wow. It's mind-boggling, really, all these different perspectives on affirmative action. And the court's changing stance on it, too. It really shows you, how much bigger this conversation is,
It's not just about affirmative action, right? It's about how we achieve equality in our society, period.
A conversation that, honestly, has been going on for decades now. And it doesn't seem like it's going away anytime soon, does it?
Nope. And what I find really fascinating is how these debates, these historical debates, they're still so relevant today.
Like they haven't lost their punch.
Not at all. The same arguments, the same ideas, we're still hashing them out in courtrooms, in classrooms, even around the dinner table.
Meritocracy, the role of government, the best way to achieve social justice.
It's all still up for debate.
It really does show you that, History isn't just something in the past, right?
No, it's alive.
It shapes how we think, how we approach these really complex issues.
And when you look at the Supreme Court's shift, its shift toward conservatism, it's clear that it wasn't just about, legal technicalities.
It is a sign of something much bigger.
A societal shift, a different way of thinking about race, about equality, the role of government, the whole thing.
And the sources, what they really drive home, I think, is that the court's decisions on affirmative action, especially with this backdrop of increasing conservatism, those decisions had very real consequences.
For sure. Affirmative action opened doors for a lot of people, underrepresented groups.
But it's not a perfect solution.
It's not. And its limitations, as we've seen through these different perspectives, they're there. They're real.
So what's the answer then? Is there a simple solution to achieving true equality?
If only it were that easy, right? It's such a multi-layered, complex challenge, and it demands a nuanced approach.
Thinking about historical context, different points of view, and being willing to tackle those tough questions head on.
You got it.
Thinking back on everything we've talked about, it seems like the big takeaway here is that there's no easy fix, no magic bullet.
Absolutely not. While affirmative action, it played an important role in moving civil rights forward, the sources also highlight the need to go deeper.
Get at those root causes of inequality.
Exactly. We have to address poverty, lack of access to good schools, limited economic opportunities. It's a commitment, not just from the government, but from all of us.
A societal commitment.
A societal commitment.
Well, this has been quite a journey, wouldn't you say?
It has.
Exploring the history, the impact, the ongoing debate. It's really made me think, and I hope it's done the same for our listeners.
I hope so too. And, more than anything, I hope this deep dive encourages everyone out there to keep digging, keep exploring these issues, engage with different perspectives, different viewpoints, and ultimately, come to your own conclusions about how we build a more just and equitable society for everyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So to our listeners, keep questioning, keep exploring, keep learning. This conversation, it doesn't end here.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings' History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.